Imagine discovering your property has been stolen overnight, not by thieves, but by an HOA you never agreed to join. 3 months ago, I woke up to a locked gate labeled Oak Ridge HOA property. No warning, no mercy. But here's what they didn't know. I'd spent 5 years preparing for this exact moment. That gate? A decoy. Their trap? My revenge. By the end, their reputation burned, their lawsuits piled high, and my land? Unshakably mine. Hey, where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below. I'm genuinely curious. Now let me tell you the story of how a powerful HOA family tried to steal my property and ended up not only losing their reputation, but facing a barrage of lawsuits. I've always been a meticulous planner. It's part of what made me successful as a software engineer. Attention to detail, anticipating problems before they arise, and having contingency plans for when they do. My colleagues used to joke that I could write code to solve problems that hadn't even happened yet. Those skills would prove invaluable when I found myself facing off against one of the most ruthless homeowners associations in San Diego County. I'd sacrificed everything for those 5 acres, slept in my car during coding marathons, skipped vacations, ignored relationships. When I finally bought it, I thought I'd win. But Oak Ridge HOA saw my dream as their loophole. And their president? A wolf in a silk scarf named Victoria Reynolds. At 38, after years of living in cramped apartments and saving every penny, I finally had enough to purchase my dream property, 5 acres of undeveloped land on the outskirts of San Diego. It bordered the prestigious Oak Ridge community, a fact that would later become the source of my troubles. My plan was simple but ambitious. Build an energy-efficient home with a workshop where I could tinker with my projects away from the hustle and bustle of city life. The property had everything I wanted: space, privacy, and most importantly, a breathtaking ocean view that made every sunset feel like a personal gift from nature. What I didn't realize when I bought the land was that this same ocean view had caught someone else's eye long before I came along. Victoria Reynolds, the 57-year-old widow who presided over the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association with an iron fist, had been eyeing my property for years. A Boston native with old money and older prejudices, Victoria considered the exclusive nature of Oak Ridge to be its most valuable asset. The thought of someone like me, a single middle-class engineer, building whatever I wanted on adjacent land was apparently more than her sensibilities could bear. Property values are the lifeblood of a community like ours, she once said at a community meeting that I later watched on video. We must protect them at all costs. What she really meant was that she would protect them at any cost, including breaking the law. Victoria wasn't working alone. Her loyal deputy was Harold Mitchell, a 62-year-old retired corporate attorney who followed her lead with the timidity of a man who had spent his career enabling stronger personalities. Though not inherently malicious, Harold's weakness made him dangerous, a man who would do the wrong thing if the right person asked him to. Jennifer Lee, the HOA secretary and an ambitious 45-year-old real estate agent, rounded out their inner circle. Unlike Harold, Jennifer would eventually face a crisis of conscience when she realized just how far Victoria was willing to go. I first sensed trouble when I received an unexpected invitation to attend an Oak Ridge HOA meeting to discuss boundary issues. I declined politely, explaining that as I wasn't a resident of Oak Ridge, their HOA had no jurisdiction over my property. That's when the friendly approach ended. What followed was a series of escalating tactics designed to pressure me into selling my land at a fraction of its value. But Victoria had made a critical mistake. She didn't know who she was dealing with. She saw me as just another obstacle to remove, not realizing that my former career in building security systems had given me an intimate knowledge of defensive strategies and trap-setting techniques that would prove to be her undoing. As I dug through old property records one night, searching for information about the history of my land, I discovered something interesting. Victoria's approach was familiar. She had used similar tactics to force another landowner out years earlier. She preferred slow pressure and public humiliation to direct confrontation. The pattern was clear: send violations for non existent issues, delay permits, create problems with local officials, and finally, when the target was sufficiently worn down, make a lowball offer that seemed like sweet relief compared to the ongoing harassment. I'm not going to play by her rules, I told myself, carefully organizing the historical documents I'd found. But I am going to let her think I am. Somewhere in that stack of old land title documents, I found a small detail Victoria and her cronies had overlooked. A detail that wouldn't just save my property, it might shake the very foundation of their HOA empire. But Victoria made one fatal mistake. She assumed I'd panic. Instead, I dug deeper and found the one document that would turn her empire to dust. The harassment campaign began predictably enough. Every few days, I'd receive official looking notices about violations that didn't exist. Excessive weed growth on land I hadn't even cleared yet. Construction debris when I hadn't begun building. Unauthorized structures that existed only in Victoria's imagination. Each notice came with a warning about fines and potential liens against my property. All completely baseless, of course, but intimidating to someone who didn't know better. Marco Sanchez, a local building inspector in his 50s, started showing up regularly for routine inspections. His hostility was barely concealed, and it didn't take long to confirm my suspicion that Victoria had him in her pocket. Every time I submitted paperwork for permits, mysterious issues would arise, delaying the process indefinitely. I kept detailed records of every interaction, every delay, every baseless citation, all while appearing increasingly frustrated and defeated. Victoria was playing her game, and I was letting her think she was winning. Mr. Morgan, Marco said during one particularly tense visit, not bothering to hide his disdain. I'm afraid there are several compliance issues with your preliminary plans. Nothing that can't be fixed, of course, but it's going to require substantial revisions and resubmission. He smiled without warmth. These things take time. Lots of time. I nodded, playing the part of the discouraged property owner. I understand. I'll get to work on those revisions right away. As soon as he left, I called Olivia Bennett, an old college friend who had become a successful real estate attorney. Olivia, I think it's time we escalated our research, I told her, keeping my voice calm despite my growing determination. I need to know everything about Victoria Reynolds, her associates, and especially any past legal issues with the Oak Ridge HOA. The situation came to a head at a community meeting where Victoria publicly accused me of planning to build an unsightly structure that would diminish property values throughout Oak Ridge. She even presented photoshopped images of an ugly, industrial looking building, supposedly based on my plans. Plans that I had never shared with anyone, let alone the HOA. The crowning touch was her dramatic conclusion. Mr. Morgan clearly has no regard for the aesthetic standards that make Oak Ridge special. We cannot allow one selfish individual to destroy what generations have built. The meeting erupted in concerned murmurs as Victoria stood smugly at the podium. What she didn't know was that my journalist sister, Rachel, was sitting quietly in the back row, recording everything. As we left the meeting, Rachel squeezed my arm supportively. She's digging her own grave, Alex. Every word of that was defamation. You're not a homeowner, Alex. You're a cockroach squatting on my view. And I exterminate pests. Victoria had muttered to me once when we crossed paths after the meeting, her hatred visceral and unconcealed. That night, after hours of additional research, I discovered Victoria's true motivation. The planned community pool expansion she had promised Oak Ridge residents to secure her re-election as HOA president required more land than they currently had. My property wasn't just convenient, it was necessary for her political survival within the community. But as I dug deeper, I found something even more disturbing. Victoria's interest in my land wasn't solely for the HOA's benefit. She had a personal stake that went back 15 years, a secret she had carefully guarded and that I now unwittingly held the key to exposing. George Coleman wasn't easy to find. The 70-year-old former city council member had deliberately kept a low profile since his retirement, but he was exactly the person I needed to talk to. As one of the original planners involved in developing the area, he knew the history of Oak Ridge and its surroundings better than anyone. More importantly, he had no love for Victoria Reynolds. She's been pulling these kinds of stunts for years, George told me as we sat on his porch overlooking the city. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he pointed to various spots on the old maps we'd spread across the table. But this time, she's made a mistake. See this road here? It's an old public access route that was never officially closed. The newer maps don't show it because it fell into disuse, but legally, it's still a public right-of-way. I studied the faded line that cut across one corner of my property. So you're saying there's another way to access my land that doesn't go through Oak Ridge territory? George nodded, a sly smile crossing his face. Exactly. And if someone were to, say, restore that access route, there's not a damn thing Victoria or her HOA could do about it. Turns out, Oak Ridge's perfect. Records missed a 70-year-old secret, a forgotten road buried under weeds, my back door. While they guarded their decoy gate, I resurrected the path they'd erased from history. This was the break I needed, a way to outmaneuver Victoria at her own game. But I wanted more than just access to my land. I wanted justice for what she'd put me through. With my background in building security systems, I began formulating a plan that would use Victoria's own tactics against her. First, I would create a decoy gate at what appeared to be the only entrance to my property, the one that bordered Oak Ridge. This would be Victoria's target, her chance to lock me out as she had done to others before. But while she focused on that front entrance, I would secretly clear and restore the forgotten public access road, creating a second entrance that only I knew about. The decoy gate would be equipped with hidden cameras and sensors, documenting every illegal move the HOA made. It was, in essence, a sophisticated honeypot for HOA overreach. This is risky, Alex, Olivia warned when I shared my plan with her. What if they escalate beyond just locking you out? What if they damage your property or try to physically prevent you from building? That's exactly what I'm counting on, I replied, showing her the security system I designed. Every action they take will be documented from multiple angles. By the time this is over, we'll have enough evidence to bring them down for good. Meanwhile, my sister Rachel had been conducting her own investigation into Victoria's past dealings. What she discovered confirmed my suspicions. Victoria wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. She was a calculating manipulator with a history of using her position for personal gain. The pool expansion project she championed included a private agreement with a development company her late husband had worked for, a clear conflict of interest she had never disclosed to the other HOA members. Over the next few weeks, I put my plan into motion. During the day, I made visible attempts to access my property through the main entrance, always appearing frustrated when confronted by HOA representatives. At night, with the help of trusted contractors who understood the importance of discretion, I cleared the overgrown public access road and set up my security infrastructure. Cameras were carefully hidden in trees, rocks, and even inside the decorative elements of the decoy gate itself. Every inch of my property line was under surveillance. Every conversation within range would be recorded. Everything's ready, I told Olivia after the final camera was installed. Now we just need to wait for Victoria to make her move. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, as I approached the main entrance to my property, I found exactly what I had been expecting: a heavy-duty metal gate blocking the way, adorned with a freshly painted sign declaring it property of Oak Ridge HOA. The trap was set, and Victoria had taken the bait. What she didn't know was that while she thought she was locking me out, she was actually locking herself into a legal nightmare of her own making. I stood before the newly installed gate, making sure my reaction was captured by both my hidden cameras and the dash cam in my car. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, pulling at the heavy lock for good measure. I called the police, knowing full well they would do little more than file a report, but establishing an official record was part of my strategy. Officer Williams arrived about 20 minutes later, looking bored and slightly annoyed. Property dispute, he muttered as he jotted down notes. This is a civil matter, Mr. Morgan. You'll need to take it up with the HOA or get a lawyer involved. But they've illegally blocked access to my property. I protested, playing my role to perfection. How can that not be trespassing or vandalism? Look, I understand you're upset, but without clear proof of who installed the gate and whether they had the right to do so, there's not much I can do. I'll file the report, but you should contact an attorney. He handed me a case number and left exactly as I had expected. What I hadn't expected was how quickly Victoria would show up to gloat. Less than an hour after the police departed, a black Mercedes pulled up alongside my car. Victoria stepped out, followed by Harold, both dressed as if they were attending a country club luncheon rather than committing property crimes. Mr. Morgan, Victoria called out, her voice dripping with false concern. Is there a problem? I turned to face them, struggling to contain my satisfaction at how perfectly they were falling into my trap. Yes, there's a problem. Someone has illegally blocked access to my property. Would you happen to know anything about that? Victoria's smile was cold and practiced. This gate? It's on Oak Ridge HOA property. I'm afraid your land is now part of our community due to a recent boundary adjustment. We've been trying to reach you about signing our covenant agreements. Boundary adjustment? That's ridiculous. You can't just claim someone else's property. Harold stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable but determined to play his part. Actually, according to our surveys and some recently discovered historical documents, this access road has always been part of Oak Ridge. We're simply securing our perimeter. So you're saying I can't access my own land unless I join your HOA? I asked, making sure the audio would be crystal clear. That's one way of looking at it, Victoria replied smoothly. Though I'd prefer to say we're inviting you to become part of our exclusive community. Of course, if you find our rules too restrictive, we would be open to purchasing your property at a fair market value. Fair? I scoffed. Let me guess, you determine what's fair. Victoria handed me an envelope. Our offer is inside. It's quite generous given the circumstances. I suggest you review it carefully. Without access to your land, its value diminishes considerably. I took the envelope, already knowing it would contain an offer for roughly half of what the property was worth. And if I refuse, then I'm afraid you'll have a lovely piece of land that you can never use or develop, Victoria said, her smile never wavering. The choice is yours, Mr. Morgan. After they left, their faces reflecting the smug satisfaction of people who thought they'd won, I opened the envelope and confirmed my prediction. The offer was insultingly low, exactly as I had expected. I called Olivia immediately. They took the bait, I told her. Every word recorded in high definition. Victoria explicitly admitted to blocking access to force me to either join the HOA or sell at a reduced price. That's textbook coercion, Olivia replied, the excitement evident in her voice. How soon do you want to spring the trap? Not yet, I said, watching Victoria's car disappear around the corner. I've agreed to meet with her tomorrow to discuss my options. Let's see how much more rope she'll give herself to hang with. What Victoria and Harold didn't know was that while we were having our conversation, a professional surveying company was quietly verifying the boundaries of my property and documenting the existence of the forgotten public access road. And they had just discovered something even more significant than we had anticipated, something that would turn the tables on Victoria in ways none of us could have imagined. The meeting with Victoria was set for 2 o'clock at the Oak Ridge Clubhouse, a location deliberately chosen to intimidate me with its opulence. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in what I hoped looked like the clothes of a defeated man considering surrender. Victoria kept me waiting, of course. A power play as transparent as it was predictable. When she finally swept into the room at 2:20, followed by Harold and a man I didn't recognize, she didn't bother to apologize for her tardiness. Mr. Morgan, thank you for being reasonable, she began, gesturing for me to take a seat across from her at the massive oak table. This is Brian Cooper, our head of security. He'll be implementing whatever arrangements we decide upon today. Brian, a muscular man in his late 40s with the watchful eyes of someone who took his job too seriously, nodded curtly in my direction. I noted his presence for the record, knowing he would likely be named in future legal proceedings. I've reviewed your offer, I said, keeping my voice deliberately hesitant. It seems, well, it's considerably below what I paid for the property. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. The real estate market fluctuates, Mr. Morgan, and property without access naturally commands a lower price. I assure you, under the circumstances, our offer is more than generous. For the next hour, I played the part of a man gradually being worn down, occasionally raising objections that Victoria smoothly countered. Harold mostly remained silent, though I noticed him shifting uncomfortably whenever Victoria's statements ventured into legally questionable territory. Brian simply stood by the door, arms crossed, a silent but menacing presence. I need some time to think about this, I finally said, rubbing my temples for effect. It's a lot to process. Of course, Victoria replied, clearly believing she had me on the ropes. Take the weekend. But I should warn you, Mr. Morgan, this offer expires on Monday. After that, well, your options become significantly more limited. As I left the clubhouse, I made a show of looking defeated for anyone watching. What Victoria didn't know was that I had spent the entire meeting gathering evidence, the recording device in my watch capturing every threatening implication, every veiled ultimatum. More importantly, she had no idea that I was headed directly to my property via the restored public access road that her security team knew nothing about. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times, but nothing prepared me for who walked in next. Victoria's own son, holding evidence she thought she'd burned. The road was rough but passable, winding through a wooded area before emerging near the back of my property. It had taken considerable work to clear it of decades of overgrowth, but the result was worth every blister and scratched arm. As I pulled up to the clearing where I had stored my construction equipment, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of Victoria's face when she discovered I'd been accessing my land all along. Over the next week, I accelerated my preparations. Through the hidden entrance, I brought in materials and equipment for the foundation of my house. A small crew of trusted workers, all sworn to secrecy and well compensated for their discretion, began the preliminary work. Meanwhile, Victoria intensified her pressure campaign, unaware that her every move was being documented. The HOA hired a private security company to patrol around what they thought was the only entrance to my property. These rental cops were instructed to prevent me from entering, a clear case of false imprisonment should I ever attempt to use that route. Victoria even went so far as to file falsified documents with the county claiming partial ownership of my land based on historical precedent. Jennifer Lee, who had been silently observing these increasingly desperate measures, began to keep her own record of Victoria's actions, sensing that things were spiraling out of control. The situation escalated dramatically when Victoria, frustrated by my apparent disappearance, directed the security team to inspect my property for compliance issues. In reality, this was nothing short of authorized trespassing. The cameras caught everything as Brian Cooper and two of his men cut the lock on the gate they themselves had installed and entered my property. They spent nearly 2 hours taking photos and placing official-looking markers at various points, all illegal actions that would later feature prominently in my case against them. What they didn't expect to find was evidence that someone had been working on the property. When they discovered the partially completed foundation, Brian immediately called Victoria. The cameras captured his side of the conversation clearly. Mrs. Reynolds, we have a situation. Someone's been building on the Morgan property. I don't know how they're getting in, but there's fresh construction work here. Victoria's response wasn't audible, but its effect on Brian was clear. His face hardened, And after hanging up, he instructed his men to damage some of the equipment I'd left on site, another criminal act meticulously documented by my surveillance system. That evening, Detective David Torres called me. A straight-shooting cop in his 40s with a reputation for integrity, Torres had been assigned to investigate my increasingly detailed complaints about the HO's activities. Mr. Morgan, I've reviewed the evidence you've submitted. This goes beyond a civil dispute. The property damage alone is vandalism, but the falsified documents and coordinated harassment could constitute criminal conspiracy. I'd like to meet with you to discuss this further. Meanwhile, Jennifer Lee had finally reached her breaking point. After discovering Victoria's fraudulent documentation, she reached out to me through an anonymous email account. I can't be part of this anymore. I have copies of everything. When you're ready to move, let me know. The pieces were falling into place. Victoria thought she was tightening the noose around my property, but she was actually entangling herself in a web of criminal liability. And she still had no idea about my secret access road or the fact that I had been building on my property right under her nose. Time had come to spring the trap. The look on Victoria Reynolds' face when she saw me standing on my property with a full construction crew was worth every penny I'd invested in my elaborate plan. Her black Mercedes screeched to a halt at the HOA's gate, and she practically tumbled out of the driver's seat, her perfectly coiffed hair coming undone as she stormed toward the fence line. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice reaching a pitch I hadn't heard before. "How did you get in there?" "Brian," she shouted into her phone. "Get security here now." I approached the fence calmly, making sure to stay on my side of the property line. "Good morning, Mrs. Reynolds. Beautiful day to start building a house, isn't it?" Harold's sedan pulled up behind Victoria's car, and he emerged looking ashen. Unlike Victoria, he immediately understood the implications of what he was seeing. "Victoria," he murmured, tugging at her sleeve. "We should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," she snapped, yanking her arm away. "He's trespassing." "On my own land? That's impossible." I couldn't help but smile. Not impossible at all when you know the history of this area. You see, while you were busy installing your illegal gate on what you thought was the only entrance to my property, I was restoring the original public access road on the eastern boundary. You know, the one that's clearly marked on the county's original surveys from 1952. I held up a laminated copy of the survey, watching as Harold's expression shifted from concern to outright fear. Victoria snatched the document from my hands, her eyes darting over the clearly marked public right-of-ways that cut across the corner of my property. "This is a forgery," she hissed, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "The county clerk's office would disagree with you," I replied evenly, as would the state transportation department, which still lists it as an unmaintained public road, never officially closed, just forgotten until now. Brian Cooper arrived with two security guards, all looking confused at the scene unfolding before them. Victoria thrust the survey into Brian's hands. "Remove these people immediately. They're trespassing on HOA property." Brian studied the document, then looked uncertainly between Victoria and me. "Mrs. Reynolds, if this is accurate, we don't have the authority to." "Dear Job." Victoria's composure was completely shattered now, her face flushed with rage. I raised my voice slightly to ensure the hidden cameras captured everything clearly. "I should mention that we're all being recorded right now. Any attempt to interfere with my construction crew would constitute criminal trespassing and possibly assault. I've already spoken with Detective Torres about the previous vandalism to my equipment. I don't think you want to add those charges." Harold finally found his spine. "Victoria, stop. Now." He turned to me, lawyer mode fully engaged despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "Mr. Morgan, I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding without further escalation. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting with our respective attorneys too." "No more meetings," I cut him off firmly. "No more negotiations. Your HOA illegally blocked access to my property, filed fraudulent documents claiming ownership of my land, vandalized my equipment, and attempted to coerce me into selling at a fraction of the market value. I'm building my house as planned on my land, using a legal access road that your HOA president conveniently overlooked in her zeal to expand her little kingdom. Victoria, seeing her control of the situation slipping away, made a fatal error. Brian, she commanded, her voice cold with fury, shut down that construction right now. I don't care how you do it. Brian hesitated, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Mrs. Reynolds, I can't legally. I'm not paying you to tell me what you can't do. The words exploded from her, loud enough for everyone present and every hidden microphone to hear clearly. Either handle the situation or find another job. That was all I needed. Victoria had just explicitly ordered her security team to perform an illegal act on camera and in front of multiple witnesses. Brian, showing more sense than his employer, shook his head and stepped back. I'm sorry, Mrs. Reynolds. My company provides security, not criminal services. We're done here. He signaled to his men, and they retreated to their vehicle, leaving Victoria exposed and without backup. Harold physically placed himself between Victoria and the fence, turning his back to me. We're leaving now, before you say anything else that will end up in a deposition. He practically dragged her back to her car, whispering urgently in her ear as she struggled against his grip. As they drove away, I caught Harold looking back at me through the passenger window. His expression wasn't one of anger, but of dawning comprehension. He had finally realized they weren't dealing with an easy mark. They had walked into a carefully set trap, and now they were caught in it with no way out. The next morning, Victoria and Harold were served with legal papers at their homes. The lawsuit named the Oak Ridge HOA, Victoria Reynolds, Harold Mitchell, and Brian Cooper's security company as defendants, with charges ranging from trespassing and vandalism to fraud, harassment, and conspiracy. Attached to the complaint were dozens of pages of evidence, photographs, video recordings, falsified documents, and sworn statements from witnesses, including Jennifer Lee, whose insider testimony would prove devastating. That afternoon, the local news van pulled up outside the Oak Ridge gates. The story they were about to break would send shockwaves through the community. Prestigious HOA accused of criminal conspiracy to seize neighboring property. Victoria's carefully constructed image and the reputation of Oak Ridge itself was about to crumble before the eyes of the entire city. When Jennifer Lee called me 2 days after the lawsuit was filed, she sounded like a different person. The confident, ambitious real estate agent had been replaced by someone nervous, but determined to do the right thing. Alex, I found something in the HOA's internal documents, she whispered, as if afraid of being overheard despite being on her own phone. Victoria isn't just after your land for the HOA. This is about something much bigger, and I think I know why she hates you so much. We met at a coffee shop downtown, far from Oak Ridge and its prying eyes. Jennifer arrived wearing sunglasses and a hat, looking over her shoulder as she slid into the booth across from me. I'm risking everything by talking to you, she said, her voice low. Victoria has powerful friends. I'll protect your anonymity as much as possible, I assured her. But I need to know what you found. Jennifer pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. These are copies of private communications between Victoria and Clearwater Development, the company her late husband worked for before he died. They've been planning a luxury resort on the hillside overlooking the ocean. Your property is the linchpin. It's the only piece of land with direct access to both the main road and the coastline view. Without it, the whole project falls apart. I flipped through the documents, stunned by the scope of what I was seeing. Architectural plans, investment projections, marketing strategies, all centered around a development that would encompass my land. Why didn't they just make me a legitimate offer before I bought it? This looks like a multi-million-dollar project. That's where it gets personal, Jennifer replied, pointing to a date on one of the documents. Your land originally belonged to Victoria's husband's family. They had to sell it during a financial downturn 15 years ago. Edward Reynolds, Victoria's husband, always intended to buy it back when their fortunes improved, but he died before he could. On his deathbed, Victoria promised him she would reclaim it and build something that would honor his memory. So when you purchased it, you unknowingly stepped into a deeply personal vendetta. Victoria sees you as the obstacle to fulfilling her final promise to her husband. And with the Clearwater deal, she stands to make millions personally, separate from any HOA benefit. The community pool expansion was just a cover story to get the HOA board behind her plans. I sat back, processing this new information. That explains the intensity of her campaign against me. This isn't just about property values or HOA control. It's emotional for her. Emotional and lucrative, Jennifer corrected. Don't mistake Victoria's sentimentality for purity of motive. She's set to receive a $2 million consulting fee if this deal goes through, plus ongoing percentages of the resort revenue. As we continued discussing the implications of these revelations, my phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Reynolds just filed for emergency injunction. Claims your access road is unsafe. Hearing tomorrow, 9 a.m. Be ready. Victoria was making her countermove, using her legal connections to try to shut down my construction while the lawsuit proceeded. It was exactly what I had expected. She couldn't afford to let me build while the legal battle dragged on. If my house was completed before the case was resolved, her development plans would be effectively dead. But what neither of us anticipated was the wild card that entered the game the next morning. As I arrived at the courthouse with Olivia, we were approached by a tall, distinguished looking man in his mid 30s. Mr. Morgan? I'm Thomas Reynolds, Victoria's son. We need to talk. Thomas had flown in from Boston after learning about the lawsuit from a business associate who had seen the news coverage. Unlike his mother, he appeared straightforward and troubled by what he had discovered. I had no idea what she was doing, he explained as we sat in a quiet corner of the courthouse lobby. My father always spoke about that land with regret. But this criminal behavior isn't what he would have wanted. What does your mother say about it? Olivia asked cautiously. She refuses to discuss it with me, Thomas replied, rubbing his forehead tiredly. Claims she's protecting my father's legacy, but I've seen the Clearwater documents. This isn't about legacy. It's about money and control. It always has been with her. Before we could continue the conversation, the bailiff called our case. Inside the courtroom, Victoria's high-powered attorney argued that my use of the abandoned, unmaintained road posed safety and environmental hazards and requested an immediate halt to all construction activities while these concerns were properly investigated, a process that would conveniently take months, if not years. When it was our turn, Olivia calmly presented evidence that I had already obtained all necessary permits for both the road restoration and my construction project. She also revealed that the county had inspected the access road just days earlier and found it fully compliant with all safety regulations. The judge, an older woman with a reputation for no-nonsense decision-making, didn't take long to make her ruling. The request for emergency injunction is denied, she declared, giving Victoria's attorney a stern look. Furthermore, the court is concerned about the pattern of interference described in Mr. Morgan's affidavit. The defendants are hereby ordered to refrain from any further action that might impede access to or construction on the plaintiff's property while this matter proceeds to trial. As we left the courtroom, Thomas approached Victoria in the hallway. Though I couldn't hear their conversation, the body language told the story. Thomas confronting, Victoria defensive, then both of them moving to a more private area for what appeared to be an intensely heated discussion. That's a twist I didn't see coming, Olivia murmured as we watched them disappear around a corner. Having her son turn against her might be the one thing Victoria wasn't prepared for. Later that day, Jennifer called with the latest development. Victoria had had a complete meltdown at an emergency HOA board meeting. Thomas showed up and publicly questioned her about the Clearwater deal. She actually confessed everything, The false documents, the vandalism orders, the illegal gate claimed it was all justified to protect Edward's legacy. The board is in chaos. Half of them are talking about resignation to avoid liability. The trap had sprung completely now, capturing not just Victoria, but exposing the corruption that had festered within the Oak Ridge HOA for years. With the injunction denied, my construction could proceed unimpeded. With Jennifer's documents and Thomas's cooperation, the lawsuit was almost certainly going to succeed. And with Victoria's public confession, criminal charges were now a very real possibility. I had all I needed to not only win this battle decisively, but to potentially see Victoria face serious legal consequences for her actions. The question now was whether victory alone would be enough, or if there might be a more satisfying and perhaps more just resolution to this conflict. Mr. Morgan, thank you for agreeing to meet, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I know you have every right to press forward with both the lawsuit and criminal charges. What my mother did was inexcusable. I sat down, studying Thomas's face for any resemblance to Victoria's calculating demeanor, but found only genuine concern and something that looked surprisingly like shame. I'm curious why you wanted this meeting, Thomas. Your mother made her position quite clear. That's precisely why I'm here, Thomas replied, opening a leather portfolio on the table. My father wasn't the man my mother portrays him as. Yes, he regretted losing that land, but not because of some sentimental attachment. He was a businessman who saw its potential value. He slid several old documents across to me. These are his personal journals and letters from that period. He never asked my mother to reclaim anything. That's a narrative she created to justify her obsession. I carefully examined the papers, finding Edward Reynolds' handwriting describing business setbacks and philosophical acceptance of losses, with no mention of a deathbed promise or a lingering attachment to the property I now owned. So the promise she claims to be fulfilling is a fiction? Thomas confirmed, his voice tinged with sadness. My father would be horrified by what she's done in his name. He was tough in business, but he was ethical. He believed in fair competition and respect for the law. Victoria arrived precisely on time, her usual imperious entrance somewhat diminished by recent events. She froze momentarily upon seeing her son, then composed herself and took the remaining seat. Harold Mitchell followed, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days, and Jennifer Lee slipped in quietly behind them, taking a chair slightly apart from the others. Olivia, who had been reviewing documents in the corner, moved to sit beside me as Victoria cleared her throat. I agreed to this meeting because Thomas believes there might be a resolution that avoids further unpleasantness. Though I maintain that my actions were justified in principle, if perhaps overzealous in execution. I couldn't help but smile at her persistent refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing. Mrs. Reynolds, let's be clear about where things stand. I have documented evidence of trespassing, vandalism, filing fraudulent documents, and conspiracy to deprive me of my property rights. The district attorney is reviewing whether to bring criminal charges, and my civil lawsuit names not just you personally, but the entire HOA board. Your insurance won't cover intentional wrongdoing, which means you're facing potential personal financial ruin. Is that an accurate summary? Harold winced visibly while Victoria's face remained stoic, though a muscle twitched near her eye. What exactly do you want, Mr. Morgan? To destroy Oak Ridge? To see me in prison? Will that satisfy your need for revenge? I don't want revenge, Mrs. Reynolds. I never did. I wanted what I've always wanted, to build my home and live in peace. Everything that's happened since has been a direct result of your actions, not mine. Thomas leaned forward, his gaze shifting between his mother and me. I've spent the past week reviewing everything, the legitimate documents and the fraudulent ones, the surveillance footage, the witness statements. There's no question that what was done was illegal and wrong. He turned to Victoria. Mother, you need to accept reality. This isn't going away. Victoria's composure finally cracked, her voice rising sharply. That land was supposed to be our legacy. Your father never asked you to do any of this, Thomas interrupted firmly. I've read his journals. This crusade is yours alone. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of misplaced devotion and calculated ambition. Victoria stared at her son, her expression shifting from anger to something that might have been grief in someone capable of genuine self reflection. I've spoken with the Clearwater Development executives, Thomas continued, now addressing me. They're willing to make you a legitimate offer for the property. Fair market value plus a substantial premium. All above board and properly documented. No pressure tactics, no threats, just business. I considered this for a moment. And if I'm not interested in selling, then they'll respect that decision and look elsewhere for development opportunities, Thomas replied without hesitation. But I thought you should at least have the option of hearing a legitimate offer before making your final decision. It was an interesting proposition. The truth was, while I had been fully committed to building my dream home on that land, the past few months had soured the experience considerably. Every view would remind me of this conflict. Every sunset tainted by the memory of Victoria's schemes. I'm willing to hear the offer, I said finally. But there are other matters that need resolution regardless of whether I sell or not. Olivia nodded and took over the conversation, laying out our terms. A public apology from Victoria and the HOA board. Full reimbursement for all my expenses, including legal fees. Immediate removal of the illegal gate and Victoria's resignation from the HOA board. In exchange, I would drop the civil lawsuit and agree not to pursue criminal charges. Harold immediately recognized this as the lifeline it was. Speaking for the board, I believe these terms are reasonable and acceptable. Victoria started to object, but Thomas placed a firm hand on her arm. Mother, enough. You've done enough damage. This ends today. The discussion continued for another hour, ironing out details and specific language for the settlement agreement. Throughout it all, I observed Victoria's gradual deflation as she realized how completely her schemes had backfired. The woman who had sought to intimidate me into submission was now submitting to terms dictated by the very person she had targeted. 3 days later, we reconvened at the law offices that represented the HOA. The Clearwater Development executives presented their offer, nearly triple what I had paid for the property. It was more than enough to purchase an even larger parcel of land farther up the coast, one with an even better view and none of the negative associations of the current property. After careful consideration and lengthy discussions with Olivia, I accepted their offer. Victoria signed a settlement agreement, her hand remarkably steady despite the humiliation of her position. The document included not only my terms, but also provisions that would restructure the Oak Ridge HO to prevent similar abuses of power in the future, a legacy very different from the one Victoria had envisioned. As the meeting concluded, Jennifer approached me quietly. I've resigned from the board, she confided. I'm starting my own real estate company, one that actually values ethics. I wanted to thank you. This whole situation has been a wake-up call for many of us. Sometimes it takes a shock to see what we've been enabling. Good luck, I replied, genuinely wishing her well in her new venture. Thomas was the last to speak with me before I left. I know this isn't how you plan things, he said, but I hope the outcome is satisfactory nonetheless. It's different, I acknowledged. But sometimes adaptability is more important than rigid adherence to a plan. I learned that designing security systems, the best protection isn't always about building impenetrable walls, but about creating flexible responses to threats. Outside the building, I took a moment to look back at the Oak Ridge community in the distance. Their elegant gate gleamed in the afternoon sun. No longer a symbol of exclusivity that intimidated me, but merely an ornate entrance to a neighborhood like any other. Bullies count on your silence. But here's the truth. The law loves a paper trail. So document everything. Stay patient. And when they finally pounce, let their arrogance hang them. Sometimes the best victory isn't defeating your enemy, but transforming the battlefield entirely. Victoria had set a trap for me, never realizing that she was walking into one herself. And in that unexpected symmetry lay a lesson worth far more than any piece of land, no matter how beautiful the view.